In a previous video, I mentioned that I wish I could find a big printer that printed as good as my Fabricator Mini. Well, the MakerFront CEO sent me this kit. It's an i3Pro. So I put it together and I'll give you my review. So this thing took me about 8 hours to put together. It was not easy. And I wouldn't say it was incredibly hard, but it was just kind of tedious. It was on par to me to putting together my X-Carve CNC or my Shapeoko, which I've done videos on. So this thing is incredibly solid. It's all metal, all screwed together, but it's gonna take you time. This is not one you just throw together quickly and go start printing, which is a little bit frustrating to me because you buy a 3D printer, you want to start printing, and that's why I prefer and I recommend for anyone just getting started, buy a fully assembled machine. In fact, I've told MakerFront that I recommend that they start selling this, or at least making an option that it comes fully assembled. Now, I guess they do have that option, but only for local pickup. It's an extra $200, and they've even got them sitting there, a couple of them sitting there ready to go if somebody wants to stop by and pick one up. So they do have that option, but hopefully that changes, that you can get it at any point in time, because overall the printer itself is very, very solid, but it does take some finesse to get this thing together. One of the first things that I noticed when I opened the box, though, was I went through the parts list and it didn't include a glass bed. It said you had to get your own 8x8 piece of glass. I thought that was really weak. You know, you spend all that money for a printer. Of course, I got this donated, but still, from your point of view, if you wanted to buy one of these, you should get all the pieces. You shouldn't have to go buy a piece of glass. And especially, this is not just any glass. You should be buying borosilicate glass, which is a high temperature glass, and then you got to get it in the right size. And it said 8x8, and my local hardware store, the good one where I get stuff, they shut down. Guy retired, so I said screw it, I'm not going to go shopping around for glass. I just went online, I found it on eBay, a 200mm by 200mm, which is close to 8x8, and I ordered it, and within 5 days I had it. So that's how I solved that. But then it turns out 8x8 is actually a little bit small. The clips, they give you the clips, but they're too small for a 200 by 200 piece of glass. So I got to find better clips. So that's, to me, that's something. I did tell MakerFront that, and they said they've had issues shipping glass with the metal because it ends up getting broken. Well, there's ways to do it. I've shipped a lot of stuff, but if that's such a big deal, ship it separate. Ship it as 2 pieces, but include the glass. Anyway, so that was the first thing that got me. And then as I went through, I was just blown away by how many pieces there were to put together, how many little screws, and then the screws. There were some lock nuts included that I had to use on the bed and a few other places that were a little bit hard to get to. Well, these things were like 5.5mm nuts. I call them screws, I meant nuts. I couldn't find a tool, and I got a lot of tools in my toolbox. I couldn't find a socket to fit those things. So I had to use a pliers or a needle nose pliers to hold them while I did it. And that's just really hokey. So that's just not having the right tools, but who's going to have a 5.5mm socket? You know, size that up a little bit. Get a more common size would be my recommendation. But I got it together, and the instructions were rather weak. I found the instructions could be improved a lot. There weren't enough pictures, and the descriptions were really, really brief. And so there were times that I put things together and then later had to go take them apart because I did it backwards, I did it upside down, because there wasn't enough information there. And that was kind of frustrating. That added time to the whole deal. And another thing is this thing didn't come with the software installed. So I had to flash the Arduino module with the firmware. So you've got to know how to use Arduino in order to get this thing to work. So that's another step that makes it a little more difficult for someone just getting started. Now it did include, they included the LCD and SD card kit at my request. They don't sell these right now. They've had some issues, I guess, so they're working on a new design. They actually asked me not to review it with this, but I couldn't leave my computer tethered to this thing at all times. And everything I print in here, in fact, any future printers I get, they got to have an SD card, or I'm not using them, because that's the only way. I can't have my computer tied up and using these things. So I hope they work out the details, because they're the issue, because it's worked well for me. It's worked fantastic for me. So this is a must, but right now it's something you'd have to buy separately. Now it's a typical ramps display, so you can get it pretty much anywhere. And the nice thing is the software was already set up to drive it, so I didn't have to modify the software to make it work. That is a nice perk that they included. So anyway, this is separate. Overall though, I think it's a very, very solid machine. Very solid. It's like a tank. You can move this thing around and you don't have to worry about anything getting bent or cracked like some of the i3s you'll see as kits on eBay and everywhere else. This thing is solid metal and it's all powder coated, so it's nice and smooth. Now that did cause one problem though. These rods that you got to stick in here and also on the plates here for the axis, they won't go in the holes directly. I had to take the rods and on my sander actually sand down the edges and then take a drill and drill out the holes a little bit just to get rid of that material, that powder coating that's on there. So that was a problem, because I don't want to pound it and bend the metal. That's not going to work. And then a few of the things are hokey, like there's only one screw holding the stop switch, the plate stop switch. And so if I push this by hand, I actually end up pushing the switch out of position. So that's something I'm constantly adjusting, because there's only one screw. The other ones have two screws, so that works out good. But then the two screws, there's no like spacer. So you end up crunching against the connector. And man, if you're not careful, you could break that connector. So there's little things like that yeah, they could probably improve. The adjustments, the screws for the stop switches. This one, I had to put my own in here because the one they gave me was too short. And the one down here for the x-axis, the adjustment head is on top, and that's what actually hits the switch. When you get this thing down to where you're close, and you might want to just tweak that screw a little bit, you can't get to the adjustment head. The head's on top instead of on the bottom. So, and this has got a shoulder, so you can't just flip the screw over and use it differently. So this should just be a full threaded screw and come up from the bottom. So it's little things like that, but overall it went together without too many issues. I kept my Patreon people up to date, and they heard my whining over and over, and some of it was my own fault. I had some electrical problems. I ended up taking everything apart and then putting it back together. And I know I had a bad connection because I wasn't getting power to the Arduino, but I was getting power into the board. But then even after I fixed all that, I still was having issues with this thing powering up. Turns out I had the power supply set to 230 volts. That's the way it arrived. There's a slide switch for 230 versus 110. So I didn't check that. It's electronics 101, check your power supply, right? So I switched that to 110, and then everything started working. So then I could actually start printing once I had my glass and everything put together. So it was about 9 hours, because it was another hour getting the bed adjusted, getting everything set, stop switches, before I could get my first print. So at that point I said, this thing better print as good as a Fabricator Mini, or I'm going to be pissed. That's 9 hours I'll never get back. So let me show you how well it printed. So the first thing I printed, of course, was my chest pawn. I've tested this on other printers. This is my base that I test everything against, because it's small, it's got a ball, and it really tests your hot end to see if it can do this. Now I sliced it in Simplify 3D. The software they recommend is Pronterface, and they tell you how to set up Cura. But after 9 hours of screwing with this thing, I said, no, I'm not going down another path using their software and everything else. I've got Simplify 3D. I'm just going there. And they didn't have a setting for MakerFront, but it's a Prusa i3 design, so that's what I used. I already had a setting in there because I had a Wanhao duplicator i3 that it was a clone. They just rebranded, and I didn't get good results. That's the one I sent back, got my money back on it, because the temperature would just fluctuate. So I had the settings, I put it in, and this thing printed beautifully, just beautiful. So it's XYZ filament, XYZ ABS. I went right for ABS. I didn't start with PLA. I said, nope, I'm jumping right in. So it's XYZ red ABS. And I like this filament because it actually it's kind of like a blend. It's almost like between PLA and pure ABS, so I can print at a lower temperature. But here's the same pond, same setting, and I passed this around to various people, and almost everyone said the MakerFront print was better. Just slightly. They're both really good, but bottom line is it printed as good as a Fabricator Mini. So after I did that, I said, okay, let's test a different ABS. So I got out some glow-in-the-dark ABS, something I haven't used in a while, and I printed that rocket. Now this, if you remember, this was in a previous Filament Friday where someone had posted that their DaVinci Pro printed this really well, but the top was just melted like crazy. And I said, that's not really good. And so I, tested my different printers, and my DaVinci couldn't handle it. It melted the top. But the Fabricator Mini, I couldn't print the whole thing, but I printed the cone. Came out really, really good. There's a little bit of melting on top, but it came to a nice point. Well, the MakerFront, just as good. I got a little bit of ribbing right here, and what it turned out is one of the set screws on the coupling here was actually coming out. It was loose, so it was actually hitting against this rod, and that's when I was getting the vibration. And by the time I caught it, it had already done several layers like that. Now it stayed intact, but you could see that spot is bad, but then it recovered and went right up to a point. So I'll show close-ups of these at the end of the video. But I'll tell you what, based on everything I've seen, they're right. This thing prints as well as a Fabricator Mini and bigger. So I'll be doing more prints on this. So just to give you a technical summary of this thing, I think in general, for $499 electrically and just the basic operation, it's not much different than any other proof shotgun out there. But the metal frame and the way it's so solid, I think helps this thing print good prints. And it's really working well for me. I've printed a bunch of things. In fact, I'm going to use it in some future Filament Friday videos. So I'm going to keep this thing around for a while. A few changes I'm probably going to make. It's got the filament sitting here in the back, and they give you these brackets, but they don't give you anything to put in the brackets. So I found a dowel rod that fit, but I think I'm going to move this whole thing so it's coming off the front, because you got the wires in here going back and forth, you got the filament, and they're kind of fighting each other, where if I move the filament to hang out here in front, then the filament can come down here and the wiring can stay back. I could put like a spring in the center